David, bureaucracy is nothing static. I mean, it changed as well over the time. So how did bureaucracy change over the last, say, 30 years?
There's been a fusion of the upper levels of the sort of corporate bureaucracy and the financial sector. That all changed in the 70s and 80s. Finance was bureaucratized. These sort of corporate CEO types and executives themselves became investors, and the financial profile of the corporation was the most important thing about it, rather than, for example, what it makes. And as that happened, there was a fusion of public and private bureaucracy, so that more and more corporations were deriving their profits from finance. Not only are the financial corporations the largest and most powerful, but even in countries like America or the UK, companies that make cars or General Electric are actually making almost all of their profits from their own finance sectors. So General Motors isn't actually making money from making cars, it's making the money from financing the cars. So more and more the profits of larger corporations are taken directly from people's pockets through the legal state court system, essentially. So the mechanisms of coercion are the mechanisms of extraction. You have to ask, is this even capitalism anymore? When I was in school, they taught me that that was what feudalism was. Capitalism is when you take the profits indirectly through the wage, and feudalism is when you just take it. Well, maybe it's some third thing that we haven't defined yet.
Yeah, and what's interesting, what I found particularly fascinating is the way you analyze bureaucracy as a form of violence.
I don't think bureaucracy is itself necessarily violent if you define bureaucracy in the Weberian sense as impersonal mechanisms which, based on a sort of ostensible principle of meritocracy command structures, you could have one of those without violence, but as it happens, in almost all cases nowadays, these bureaucratic structures are ways of either enforcing violence or mitigating its effects through systems which nonetheless partake of it. We don't think of the police as bureaucrats, but police are basically bureaucrats with weapons. So in a way, it's very clear, police use violence to enforce their ability to categorize things into little bureaucratic categories. And most of what police do has to do with administrative regulations and not with crime at all. Everybody who's ever followed a cop around, sociologists who sort of do time allocation studies, says very little police time has anything to do with crime. So we think of police as responding to violence, but actually 98% of what they do is bringing the threat of violence into situations which have to do with broken tail lights or people selling things on the street and where they're not supposed to.
Well, David, I would like to ask you, is there any way out? Can we remove the bureaucratic limits? Or do you, above all, think new rules and, different, I would call it more intelligent form of bureaucracy is possible?
Well, anything's possible, but the danger we have is that these things feed on themselves in such ways, in academia we call it the creating committees to deal with the problem of too many committees problem. That's the danger. It's very difficult to address a problem caused by bureaucracy without creating more bureaucracy. And I think the only alternative is to just start over and create entirely different forms. And I think it's not insignificant that most increasingly popular social movements that operate outside the state do so in such a way as to create exactly those kind of alternatives. My great realization, in which I started the book, is that the global justice movement from the very late 90s and 2000, 2001, that period, which is when I became involved in really hardcore activist, anarchist politics, was essentially a movement against global bureaucratization. And we never thought of it in those terms at the time. But when we talked about the IMF, the World Bank, WTO, all of these structures of trade bureaucracies, what we were essentially doing was pointing to the existence of the world's first planetary bureaucratic administrative system, because when people talked about it, they talked about free trade, the free market, the internet, the free flow of information, all these, propaganda words, because whenever free is in there, you're being told what side you have to be on. But in fact, when they talked about free trade, they weren't talking about free trade. They were talking about, they were actually talking about the creation of these huge administrative systems, which nobody elected and weren't accountable to anybody, who, were the world's first planetary administration. I mean, you had the UN, but the UN didn't have any teeth. The IMF did. If you didn't do what the IMF said, you were in big trouble. So they had enforcement mechanisms, and nobody was supposed to know it existed. And all of those themes, which became clearer and clearer, the fact that it was all ultimately based on power, what they essentially did was they said, well, this is supposed to be free trade. This is supposed to be about, peaceful commerce and erasing borders and wars. Let's see what happens if, the people affected by this actually try to show up and surround the hotel. But what was really important about that movement is that it also tried to propose models of direct democracy, which not only pointed out that the existing structures of governance were undemocratic, but showed how actual democracy might work. That's what we were essentially doing. And not only are these things ugly, evil, and undemocratic, they're not even necessary.
Well, finally, David, I'd like to ask you, I know you have embarked on a new project, and you're currently working on a new book. What is it about?
I'm writing a book about bullshit jobs. I constantly kept meeting people that when you ask them what they do, well-off people, clearly sort of upper middle class, sort of lifestyle, and if you do something interesting, I'm an anthropologist, I just got back from Madagascar, what do you do? And they'd be like, oh, nothing, and you try to press them, they get a little drunk, come on, what do you actually do? Well, I've got this job. We kind of organize meetings to discuss reports that other people wrote, and then we write reports that nobody else reads, and this sort of meaningless administrative jobs. So how many people like that are there, and how must this affect their lives, and what would it be like to wake up every morning and go to a job that you secretly believe doesn't actually do anything and doesn't need to exist? Mustn't that have some terrible effect on your soul? So I wrote this little essay about it called On the Phenomena of Bullshit Jobs. It's funny, I wrote the essay, it came out in this newly founded left-wing kind of anarchist newspaper called Strike. It was a spin-off from the International Times, this famous underground newspaper. But it was obscure, about as obscure as you can possibly get. It goes out on the internet, and me and my girlfriend had decided we were going to go to the forest. Went to a little cabin by a lake. I never get to do this kind of thing. There was my phone was working, but there was no internet. We just came with a basket of books. We were just row in the middle of the lake and read things and discuss philosophy and just get away from the world. And sure enough, the moment I go out there, I start looking at my phone and I'm like, what the hell is going on? And suddenly this essay comes out, and within 2 weeks, it's translated into 15 different languages. It just goes crazy. The site keeps crashing. There's newspapers start covering it. Just it goes everywhere, all over the world. So I guess it's I guess I must have been right. I guess there really are a lot of people. And then there's these people started writing these blogs and in the comment sections of newspapers. I collected all this stuff. There's all these people saying, oh my God, it's true. It's really true. I'm a corporate lawyer. I contribute nothing to society. I'm miserable every day, but I just do it for the children. So there's these sort of anonymous confessions. So I just figured, book kind of wrote itself. All I had to do is tabulate all these discussion pages on the internet and sort of build it up into an argument.